In this video, I want to compare my newly purchased Voigtlander 40mm f1.4 with two of my most frequently used lenses, Leica 35mm Summicron spherical and TTArtisan 50mm f0.95. I do this comparison mostly to see if I can replace my TTArtisan 50mm with this little Voigtlander for film photography. The Leica 35mm is my go-to lens and it is almost always on my Leica M240 for digital photos. It is a solid performer and always delivers, so it isn't going anywhere for now. I picked up my TTArtisan 50mm around 5 years ago, and all I wanted from it at the time was some crazy background blur. But after buying my Leica M3, soon it became my main lens on this camera. I usually use it wide open, even outside with an ND filter. The main feature of this lens is that it has a massive background blur at f0.95. And I think it is one of the best rivals for the legendary Leica Noctilux. But just because you have f0.95 doesn't mean that you should always be at f0.95. If I need to step down for more depth of field, all that weight is nothing but a pain, especially if you want to use it for travel and street photography. So I started looking for something smaller for my Leica M3. First I tried Canon LTM 50mm f1.8 and I didn't like it. Then for a long time I used my Leica 35mm Summicron spherical, but like I said, this lens is almost always on my Leica M240, and plus Leica M3 doesn't have 35mm frame lines, so I should either use an external viewfinder or estimate my frame. Now, why this Voigtlander 40mm? Well, first of all, you can shoot 40mm on Leica M3 and use your whole viewfinder to frame the shot. Then look at this lens. It is tiny and it still has f1.4. I got a multi-coated version and I have used it on both film and digital. Now, let's compare the weight of these lenses. TTArtisan is almost 700 grams. Voigtlander is 4 times lighter and it is only 207 grams. And Leica is only a little bit heavier and it is 264 grams. Leica has a focusing tab and the aperture ring is ribbed and it is nice and clicky. The Voigtlander also has a focusing tab, but the aperture ring is not ribbed. But it has a couple of tabs on it and it feels almost as good as the Leica. And finally, the TTArtisan doesn't have focus or aperture tab, but both of the rings are ribbed and they feel very good. Now, first of all, let's see how these lenses perform indoor with a subject at minimum focus distance and a relatively distracting background around 3 meters away. This is a scenario that I deal with almost every day. Here is the TTArtisan at f0.95. As you can see, the background is obliterated. The subject is fuzzy and low contrast. The image has a hint of purple in it and the lens can barely handle the edges. But I think while technically not perfect, it is a very nice image. Here at f1.4, the sharpness and contrast improve drastically. The bokeh becomes less extreme, but I can see some distracting lines. Now let's step down to f2. The sharpness and contrast improve even more and that hint of purple is gone. Now let's look at Voigtlander 40mm at f1.4. The background blur is less extreme than the TTArtisan wide open and the subject is still fuzzy and low contrast. Maybe the sharpness is better with 50mm at f1.4. Also, it seems that the color tint shifts more toward green with this lens. Now let's look at Voigtlander 40mm at f2. Suddenly drastic improvement in sharpness and contrast, and it seems even a little sharper than TTArtisan at f2. Other than that, the Voigtlander has a slight barrel distortion, while the TTArtisan seems to have a little pincushion distortion. Now, as a reference, let's look at the Leica 35mm wide open at f2. The contrast and sharpness is better than the other two. The distortion is much less and there is no color shift. And the bokeh is also very well controlled and pleasing. Now, let's look at this Christmas tree for a bokeh test. Here is the TTArtisan 50mm at f0.95, which looks really good in center, but when you go toward the edges, there are some artifacts, but overall it still looks really good in my opinion. Now at f1.4, the bokeh balls are polygonal shaped and less pleasing. And at f2, the polygonal shape is less distracting than f1.4, but the bokeh balls are much smaller. Now, let's look at the Voigtlander 40mm at f1.4. The bokeh quality is less than TTArtisan at f0.95, and there is double-edged bokeh balls even at center. And here's the Voigtlander at f2, polygonal and distracting, and of course smaller bokeh balls. And now, just for a comparison, let's look at the Leica 35mm at f2. It looks okay, not very extreme, but circular and nice. However, if you zoom in more, to my surprise there is some onion rings. Now let's take these lenses outside and test on a subject with a relatively busy and challenging background. First, let's start at a distance of 5 meters to the subject. Here's the TTArtisan 50mm at f0.95. The background is very smooth and pleasing. The subject is not very sharp and there is a heavy purple vignetting. Now at f1.4, there is less background blur, but still pleasing in my opinion. Sharpness of subject increased and vignetting is better. For TTArtisan at f2, the background blur is less, but now it seems more busy with harsh lines. Subject sharpness is better and vignetting is much better than f1.4. Now let's go to the Voigtlander at f1.4. The subject sharpness is worse than TTArtisan at f1.4 and the bokeh seems a little harsher. Even the vignetting is worse than TTArtisan at f1.4, but at least it is not purple. If you step down the Voigtlander to f2, the sharpness increases a lot, but bokeh is still harsher than TTArtisan. And now let's look at the Leica at f2. The sharpness is good as expected, background blur is less than the other two, but not harsh, and there is minor vignetting. Now let's move to 3 meters to the subject. For TTArtisan at f0.95 and f1.4, very nice bokeh and relatively good subject sharpness. Same story at f2. For the Voigtlander at f1.4, the sharpness is worse than TTArtisan and there is some purple fringing, and bokeh is harsher. At f2, sharpness improves a lot, similar to TTArtisan at f2, and the bokeh is slightly harsher than TTArtisan. And finally for the Leica, both subject sharpness and bokeh are good. Now let's go to the minimum focus distance. To my eye, the TTArtisan looks good at every aperture. I know it is not sharp at f0.95, but it is decent at f1.4 and very good at f2. And bokeh is good no matter what aperture. Now for the Voigtlander, the sharpness is good at f1.4 and f2, but bokeh seems a little harsher. And finally, Leica has good sharpness and bokeh again. Now let's talk about the light gathering capability. I took these test shots on my Leica M240 at ISO 200 and auto shutter speed. For TTArtisan at f0.95, the shutter speed is 250 and at f1.4 it is 125. For the Voigtlander at f1.4, the shutter speed is 125 and at f2 it is 60. And finally for the Leica, the shutter speed is 60 at f2. So it seems that at the same aperture, these lenses are equal in terms of light transfer. In the other word, the f0.95 in the TTArtisan seems to be really one stop brighter than f1.4 of Voigtlander and 2 stops brighter than f2 of both other lenses. Also, you can see a purple tint in TTArtisan and a green tint in the Voigtlander. and of course heavy vignetting for the Voigtlander at f1.4. Now let's do a quick flare test. I don't really shoot toward a strong light, but I think it is one of the important factors in any lens performance. It was a cold night, so don't expect the best testing condition. Here is the TTArtisan at f0.95. So bad, not even funny. And here's at f1.4, much better. And here's the TTArtisan at f2, which is acceptable. Here's the Voigtlander at f1.4. It shows multiple issues. Here's Voigtlander at f2, which is acceptable but could be better. And here's Voigtlander at f2.8, which is very good. Now here's the Leica at f2. It is a slightly different angle, but the result is not as good as I expected. And finally here's Leica at f2.8, which is slightly better. Now, before finishing the video, let's look at some sample images with the Voigtlander 40mm on film. So, what is the conclusion here? Well, if you want a pixel peep, the Voigtlander didn't really perform as much as I expected. But on film and as an everyday lens, the Voigtlander totally beats the TTArtisan in terms of size and weight, especially a stop down. But in terms of bokeh, the TTArtisan is better. My Leica doesn't go anywhere, but I already knew that. So I think I'm gonna keep my TTArtisan for now, but I'm gonna use the Voigtlander and Leica M3 a lot more. So that's it. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to my channel. Also feel free to follow me on Instagram, Blue Sky, and X, also known as Twitter.